in 2019, the first time capsule buried by Stumpy Sanderson and his gang of mischievous working-class boys, and which was actually an old Watney's Party 7 can, was unearthed. Then in 2023, the second time capsule, which was an old Courage Jackpot Bitter Party can, was discovered. And now, Whistling 5 Anarchic Productions, in conjunction with the 1970s Cigarette Appreciation Club and Puffer Patterson's Benevolent Fund for Aging Thespians, proudly presents Series 2 of Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s stories, and the 22 stories found in that second time capsule. As narrated by Andrew Brammer. Bonjour, bon après-midi, et bonsoir. The story you are about to hear is narrated in the first person, because I, just like Stumpy, witnessed firsthand the momentous events which it describes. So, let's park up the rally chopper, dim the lava lamp, switch off that episode of Catweasel, finish up the plate of Vesta beef curry, crack open a can of Double Diamond, light up a mannequin cigar, and kick back, sit back, and listen in to the anarchic and outrageous japes, scrapes and capers of Stumpy Sanderson and his gang. For this story, we head back to 1974 for a hose for all seasons. Boys of our ilk always had a thing about messing about with hoses and with contraptions. So imagine Stumpy and mine's delight when we saw Slackjack Arnold and Turps Maguire come trundling down the road, pulling an orange contraption that looked like some form of water tanker, about 5 foot long and 2.5 feet high, with some valves and controls at the side of it, a normal garden-type hose coiled on its rear end, and a much thicker hose coiled in the gap that stood between the bottom of the tanker and the wheels. Slackjack and Turps seemed to be pulling it with great ease. "What on earth is that?" beamed Stumpy. "This, gentleman, is a hose for all seasons. We picked it up from the scrapyard," said Slackjack, a tall boy with lank fair hair, droopy eyes, and a conspiratorial grin. Chalk and cheese to the smaller vulpine-like figure of Turps, with his reddish-brown hair, darting eyes, and what teachers called a shifty demeanour. Now, one thing you could never accuse Slackjack and Turps of was lack of initiative or money-making endeavour, and for some months they had run a profitable racket in purloining scrap metals from various sources and then wheeling them up the scrapyard in an old pram and a supermarket trolley, and doing a good deal with Big Vic Moncrief, who ran the yard. Sometimes they would come away with hard cash, other times with items they thought might come in handy, and this was clearly one of those. They then explained to us just what the contraption was. It was an American-made car and patio wash, dual-tanked multi-cleaner that had been part of a huge job lot that Big Vic had secured. It looked like it had hardly ever been used, and Slackjack and Turps were actually unsure why it had been traded in as scrap. Amazingly, it even had its instruction manual still with it in a polythene folder, which said, "A hose for all seasons. Domestic use. High performance cleaner and dryer." As Stumpy and I leafed through the manual, we saw what this piece of kit could do. Cars, patio areas, walls, windows, tennis courts, swimming pools. There were all sorts of pictures in there showing good old middle American families putting the machine to use. Because it was made of a revolutionary form of aluminium, it was also extremely easy to pull and transport. Stumpy and I, though, were still a bit baffled. "But what use is this going to be?" "Ah," said Slackjack, "this piece of kit is absolutely revolutionary. cleans things spotlessly and then rinses and dries them. But more importantly, in double quick time. And all with this special hose linked to the dual internal tanks of the machine, he said, pointing to the coil of the larger hose. If we market this right, we can all clean up with car and patio washes. But why do you or we want to get involved spending our time washing cars, I asked. No, not us, lads, said Slack Jack, smiling. We rent it out to boys already doing that sort of stuff. We've worked it out that for a normal Saturday morning car wash round, someone with a hose for all seasons will be able to do 3 times the amount of customers than they would usually be able to do with a normal sponge and bucket or hose. As Stumpy was still leafing through the manual, he then said, "Don't you need some of this special cleaning compound it says about, though?" Turps grinned, went to a box on the side of the orange tank, and produced a large clear bag of yellow powder. Came with it. Any more we can get mail order. There's an address in Birmingham on the back that imports it from the States. So, all we needed now was to convince the best car washers around of the benefits of using a hose for all seasons over traditional washing methods, and do a deal with them on renting the equipment. Stumpy and I agreed commercial terms for our cut with Slack Jack and Turps, and, with this incentive, we duly secured ourselves a demo with Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward, who had the biggest car wash customer base in our area. Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward were very good eggs. Small, hard-working, honest and humble boys who never ever raised their heads above any parapets, and who never got themselves into any trouble. And they had built up a thriving Saturday and holiday car wash round, which was based on the Cubs Bob-a-Job business model and covered the whole of our road, 3 of its offshoot roads and avenues, and some lucrative new business in one of the nearby posh closes that they had recently secured. When Stumpy and I proposed our idea, they had initially been very nervous and unsure. But after a good deal of persuasion, particularly when we explained the economic and reputational benefits that they would experience from an increase in their capacity and customer base, they at last, and at least, agreed to us conducting a demo of the hose for all seasons for them. So there we were, 10 to 11 on a warm Saturday morning. Slack Jack and Turps in light brown junior boiler suits with the hose for all seasons. Stumpy and I, who had arranged the demo, the small and slight freckle-faced figures of Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward, looking nervous and edgy, all standing next to a beautiful-looking mid-blue Triumph Spitfire on one of Gentle Gerald's and Mild Edward's new customers' driveways in the posh close, which we all knew as Snob's Close. Luckily, these customers were not present, as both the pencil-moustached Mr. Forrester and the tight-permed Mrs. Forrester were back inside the house, leaving Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward to their own devices, and with access to the outside tap round the side of the house and the electricity supply in the open garage. Also, luckily, Mr. and Mrs. Forrester had not seen us arrive with the contraption, which we had kept well out of sight until Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward had secured their car-cleaning go-ahead. So, all systems were go, with Slack Jack and Turps having already emptied the whole bag of the yellow cleaning powder into the opening at the top of the tanker, and then filled the tanker full of water by connecting the smaller hose to the outside tap. They had also connected the electric cable to the plug in the garage. The green light at the side of the machine had come on, and the appliance was now emitting a low and steady hum. By now, an old retired-looking colonel of a man with a grey handlebar moustache and wearing a tweed jacket was standing at the end of the driveway, watching us getting things ready, nodding and muttering, Nice to see some young lads showing some initiative." And a snooty-looking woman was just walking past with a girl who we recognised from our school, and who, on catching sight of us, immediately nudged her mum, pointing to Stumpy, me, Slackjack and Turps and saying, "I know those boys, they're trouble." Also, a couple of kids on bikes from our year had braked to a halt, grinning widely and saying, "This we've got to see." Hearing all this, Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward were now growing visibly more nervous. "Are you definitely sure this will all be okay?" they piped. "Of course it will. This will change your business forever," grinned Slackjack. But then Turps, who was consulting the instruction manual, said, "OK, it says when the green light is showing we turn this dial, which is for the cleaning compound foam. We then wait 2 minutes once the car is covered in suds, and then we turn this second dial for the super jet rinse stream, when the orange light will come on. I think that's how it works." "What do you mean you think that's how it works? Haven't you tried it out yet?" I said. Turps and Slackjack both looked startled at this bombshell question. "Not really, but we're pretty confident about the water side of things, although we're not quite sure we've got the strength of the cleaning compound quite right yet." Hearing this, Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward went white, and in pleading tones both said, "We really don't think we should go through with this. Can we please stop?" But it was too late, and with instruction manual still in hand, Turps turned the dial, and the machine's humming sound grew louder, and then thick yellow foam started to pour from the wide nozzle of the large hose, which Slackjack was holding and pointing at Mr. and Mrs. Forrester's mid-blue sports car. As the thick gunge of the yellow spume quickly started to cover and swallow the car, Slackjack, like the expert he thought he was, addressed everyone. "No need to look concerned, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we simply cover and coat the object to be cleaned in this special patented cleaning compound, which actually cleans and polishes at the same time, which of course you will see after it has done its work and we have super jet washed the vehicle clean with clear water." By now the car was completely covered in the thick yellow lather. Indeed, the suds were so thick that you actually couldn't see any of the car at all. It was just an approximately car-shaped mass of seething yellow effervescence. "OK, Turps, I think that's enough," shouted Slackjack. "Let's show these good people what this machine can really do." And with that, Turps hit the switch for the super clean jet wash. Instantly, there was a massive whooshing sound, and then suddenly the clear water shot out from the hose's end with the tremendous gushing force of a geyser, so powerful that it threw Slackjack backwards a good 3 feet. As he frantically tried to control the hose, it was like watching someone wrestling with a rampant python, the water blasting onto the yellow foam-covered car, the sound nearly deafening as the water hammered onto the vehicle. Turps quickly turned back the dial to reduce the intensity of the super jet rinse stream, and as the water stream started slowing up, Slackjack regained full control of the hose. As we watched, the frothing yellow suds now being washed and rinsed clear, the mass of thick bubbles and lather running off the car, dispersing onto the driveway, streaming like foul river currents into the rose beds and onto the front lawn, Stumpy suddenly nudged me. "Look at the colour of that bonnet. I thought that car was mid-blue." "Crikey," I said, as we looked on with growing horror, also now picking up definite and very peculiar sounds of crackling and hissing. By now, the small crowd at the end of the driveway had fallen completely silent, watching in horrible fascination. Gentle Gerald and Mild Edward looked like they were going to faint, and Slackjack and Turps, with their hosing now finished, were looking visibly panicked. For there stood Mr. and Mrs. Forrester's Triumph sports car, now a blistering, hissing, and popping monstrosity, great patches of its body down to the colour of its base metal, other patches a far lighter shade of blue than mid-blue, other parts with the paintwork blistering and bubbling, the risen and stripped paintwork making strange popping sounds, and looking like it had either been sandblasted or had been in a fire. You could barely make out it had once been a pristine mid-blue car. We also saw that the driveway itself was beginning to smoke, hiss and steam, and that the lawn area, where the residue of yellow cleaning compound had run to, was already beginning to show scorched areas, and some of the roses in the rosebed looked like they were blackening and wilting. As everyone stood and continued to take in this awful and dreadful spectacle, the small crowd standing in the close still stunned in fascinated silence, Slack Jack and Turps scratching their heads in alarmed and concerned bewilderment as to how this disaster could have happened, poor gentle Gerald and mild Edward looking sick and white with terror. Stumpy and I heard the sound of a front door opening, and we turned to see, standing on the front doorstep of that house in Snob's Close, the aghast, horror-struck, and now turning furious and fuming figures of Mr. and Mrs. Forrester. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories. And please don't forget to check out the other stories from Series 2 and Series 1. You can also follow Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories on Facebook, where you can keep up to date with all the news about live shows and other Stumpy events. There's also the website, www.stumpysanderson.co.uk, and the Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories YouTube channel. And you can get in touch with me at andrew@stumpysanderson.co.uk. Until the next story, au revoir et bonne nuit. And keep grooving.
Yeah. This podcast has been recorded using a DIY punk rock philosophy. Yeah.